Hello. So today we are going to talk about the book Renegades by Marissa Meyer. So here's the rub, or the beef. My beef with this book is that there really is no beef. I know that sounds strange, but let me elaborate. This book was fine. It was probably even good, and I think that's the problem. Oh, and kudos to Marissa. You took all the criticism from your Lunar Chronicles series about too many heterosexual, unracially diverse relationships seriously and gave us an African American main character who has two dads. So, check, you marked that box. And maybe this little tidbit is where my disquiet from this book stems from. Like I said previously, it was fine, even verging on the side of good, but maybe was it too good? I don't know. I know now I'm definitely just sounding like a crazy, deranged person just trying to find fault, but stick with me a second. Or not, and just go read the book and love it and call me crazy. That's fine by me. But I do think I have a point. I think the whole thing was a little too polished, a little too contrived. Like the author was going down a checklist of things she needed to hit as the story progressed, starting with, as I previously mentioned, a racially and sexually orientedly, yes, that is the word, diverse cast. So check, she filled that one. Moving on down the checklist, we have the misunderstood supervillain, check. He has his deep-seated, morally grounded reasons why it's justifiable to put countless lives in danger and even commit minor genocide for the sake of family honor or something. Still a bit hazy on that front, but he definitely is misunderstood, and so are all of his friends, so that's good to know. Next on our checklist is the do-gooding government, who is, of course, lying to everyone for their own good while really being the blight to existence itself. So, there you go. Which, of course, because of said government and misunderstood villain, we now need a vigilante and an angsty spy so that we can have a, Romeo and Juliet romance story filled with lots of dramatic irony. Yay! I guess what I'm getting at here is that throughout this perfectly contrived, politically correct, intriguing story, you gave me exactly everything I could possibly want. Except you forgot to make me care. You forgot to, completely immerse me into the minds of your characters and really feel what they were feeling and care about the things that they care about. You did a little, but I was still left wanting. See, sometimes the problem with seeing both sides to the story is that it makes it lose its intrigue, its passion, its memorability. Since the story is told from the perspectives of the government lapdog and the angsty niece of the misunderstood villain, instead of opening my eyes to both sides of this very culturally, racially, and socially diverse story, you kind of just made me yawn and want to close my eyes and go to sleep, which I literally did more than once while trying to read this book. So, like I said, it's not that this book had anything really bad happening or going on. It's just it didn't have anything great. Anything that forced me to pick sides or become emotionally invested in the lives of these characters. I think the author just spread me a little too thin and gave me too many sides. So it all just kind of blurred into a blah. Blah. Okay, so for some comparisons. Sorry, I have to do it because that is who I am. I couldn't help but compare this book to Steelheart, which I love. If you're watching this, stop and just go read Steelheart. The reason I bring it up is because it's a similar story, almost like the opposite story in a lot of ways. Basically, Steelheart takes place in a world where Magneto runs the government and Professor X has to try and take him out with no X-Men, whereas Renegades is more like Professor X with his X-Men took out Magneto 10 years ago and are still trying to pick up the pieces of destruction he left in his wake, but they are both post-superhero apocalyptic-ish stories. Basically, both stories happen because superheroes or villains ruin the world, and here we are trying to fix it. Superheroes exist, and, this is the reality of life with that kind of thing happening. And in a lot of ways, that is where the similarities end, but in a lot of ways not, too. Point of this, both books feature a secret group trying to take down the big bads. In one case, it's the supervillain, in the other case, it's the government, and both feature a double agent. Problem with that in the Renegades is that you're inside both of their heads. You know who everyone is, and you know exactly what all of them are thinking the whole time. So you have no, wow, or what? I didn't know that was her. How can that be her or him moment, which I think is a pity because both ideologies of the main characters are so extreme and so opposite that by putting them side by side instead of enhancing them, it kind of just deflates them. All I'm saying is I can love the multiple viewpoints in some books, but I don't think it's a convention that should always be used. And I think it's starting to be a little overused. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it works. And in this book, it did work, but I think it would have been a much more powerful book if we had just left one side of the story up to the imagination. There's something to be said about having a biased, unreliable narrator that can add depth and, interest to a story. It's all well and good to eventually get both sides, but sometimes it's nice to draw those conclusions for yourself, or even better, watch or experience the character drawing them for themselves. But you lose that sense of journey and sense of discovery when you've already seen it or been shown it from the other side directly. It was almost like this book was already treating itself like a movie. You know how most book adaptations take you to the other side when the book didn't? And that's fine because it makes sense on screen since you can't actually be inside their head. You have to make up for that a little bit, so you need that other perspective. For instance, in the movie Pride and Prejudice, when they added the scene where we see Mr. Darcy all broody at Rosings Park while he's writing his letter to Lizzie. It was like that, but reversed. I was reading the book, but I felt like I was getting the on-the-surface movie version of the story, which is never as good, as we all know too well. Instead of the extra insightful, thought-provoking side, which is what we read books for, right? So I guess in the end, my beef is that I think there was too much going on. We were too busy jumping from head to head to ever really get settled into one mindset or perspective, which makes it hard to get to know the characters. And I really like characters. When, because you just have to read it if you haven't already. So when you read Steelheart, you may get really sick and tired of all of David's really bad metaphors, but I have to say, by the end of that book, you know David. You could imagine having a conversation with the guy, and you know exactly what he would say or do in that conversation because you know him. You've been inside his head and only his head for 300 plus pages. He's now one of your best friends, not just some guy you knew for a bit. I feel like in Renegades, Nova and Adrian are just some people I've met a few times in passing. I've seen their movie, but I don't really know their favorite color, what really makes them tick. I have an idea. I think I've got a pretty good idea, but it's not the same as being completely immersed in their world and in just their world. So to sum up, I guess, Nova and Adrian, I look forward to getting to know you more in the books to come. I just wish I had a little more biased version of your story thus far. Well, a more biased version of one of your stories thus far. So basically, I wish I knew one of you better and one of you not as well. I know that may sound strange, but it is what it is. So, later pages!